Hello, I'm back again, same person, a different topic, and I'm going to be welcoming shortly a panel, and the title of today's discussion is Effortless Mobile-Centric ID Proofing and Authentication. And I really do have a great panel of suppliers, platform companies from the industry who are going to tackle some really interesting issues around proofing and authentication. So I'd like to introduce the panel to you. First of all, can I welcome Paul McGuire of tru.ID. Hello, Paul. So if you could just give us a little bit of an overview about yourself and tru.ID.
Sure. So my background is predominantly mobile. I've been in the business for about 20 years. I was one of the co-founders of mBlocks back in the day, the SMS aggregation business, now part of Cinch. And after that, I set up a business in mobile payments that became one of the founding businesses in Boku, and I was a board member of Boku for a number of years. And then now I'm CEO and co-founder of tru.ID. We're a developer-focused API platform, and we offer mobile authentication as a service.
Thank you, Paul. I'd next like to welcome Luke Moore of iProov.
Hi, Andrew, and hi to the panel. Yes, my name is Luke Moore. A little bit of background about myself. I'm SVP of Revenue currently at a company called iProov, and working with our channel partners and direct customers globally. My background is actually outside of digital identity in the social media space. For about 12 or 13 years in the development of that space towards social media analytics. And at the heart of the conversation that was going on in social media is in essence your ability to prove that you are who you say you are. So if the internet was the platform for communication, social media is the people behind it, and digital identity is the hard center of your digital life. And that's the career I've been enjoying with iProov for the last few years.
Thank you, Luke. I'd next like to say hello to Stuart Neal of Boku.
Thanks, Andrew.
Stuart.
Good morning indeed. Yeah, hi everybody. Nice to see Paul here. The more Boku people online, the better. So I run Boku's identity business. Boku has a long history of connecting mobile operators around the world. We work with over 200 mobile operators. Initially, that was to provide payment solutions to large digital merchants, and now we're using a similar approach and similar technology by connecting through to carriers to provide identity services.
Thank you, Stuart. I'd now like to say hello to Surash Patel of TeleSign.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Hi.
And to see you all again in some cases. So, yes, recently joined TeleSign, and I looking after the EMEA region here. TeleSign is a digital identity organization, and have been, I guess, building up this capability over the last 10 to 15 years by working with some of the largest internet brands that you would have heard of, and taking insights from working with those kinds of organizations, plus some of the capabilities offered by operators to then create digital identity solutions. So I'm quite pleased to be here. My background is in messaging. I've been in messaging for more years than I care to mention, and most recently working with Real Networks, looking at their solutions around message analysis using natural language processing. In fact, one of the exciting things about TeleSign is their use of machine learning in this space as well. So hopefully we'll be able to dig in on some of that stuff later on.
Thank you, Surash. And last but by no means least, we have Viktorija Radman of Infobip.
Hey, hello to everyone. So ladies last, yeah? Okay.
Hey, I did it in alphabetical order today. Okay. So unfortunately,
no worries, no worries. I'm just joking, yeah. Okay, so coming from Infobip, as you can see, working there for last 2 years and mainly responsible there for mobile identity portfolio, but closely working with the telecom side. So trying to advise, advocate, and to get all the connections that we can get in order to provide that solution to our clients. Previously, I was working in Ericsson for more than 15 years, so I'm really related to that telecom part of the business more than the clients and everything. So, but Infobip, of course, is working in other products where we are as well incorporating this digital identity portfolio as well.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my first question to you, Viktorija, and
okay.
It's really I'm starting at the basics, really, and to get an understanding of how digital identity differs from identity.
Okay, that is, I mean, it's easy for us to understand because we are in this portfolio for already few years and we know what we are talking about. But it's really strange that just in span of few years, let's say, we've gone from identity would be improving just by cards, passports, or papers, to being one now with the digital identity, whatever that means. So when we are saying identity, we usually think about static data from our national ID cards as name, surname, address, or ID or something like that. But this doesn't match in digital world. So we're just scanning our ID card with that static data. This is not enough, and it's really easily found by fraudsters, so it can be tricked very easily. So obviously for digital world, digital transactions and everything, we need more than that. We need better solution, and digital identity is something that we are looking with few concerns, of course, because this is new space, but big improvement in our daily life and works for us as end user, and of course as for enterprise as a client. So this no static data of our behavior can, of course, identify us in more advanced and secure way than just national ID card and this static data. We are working closely with telecoms, and that's why we see mobile operators and mobile-centric data as a really something important, because they are storing plenty of different network behavior and our personal data in their network databases.
I'm going to open that question to the panel in a moment. I first of all have to apologize that I didn't introduce Philipp from Jumio. Oh. So before we move any further, I'll let Philipp say a few words about himself and his organizations.
Of course, and I know it's tough hosting live sessions for hours and hours. So great job on doing that. So I'm Philipp Pointner. I'm the Chief of Digital Identity at Jumio. Served as the Chief Product Officer for many years at Jumio before that. At Jumio is a identity company, but our core business is built around really inspection of the government issued ID and making sure it's authentic. And only recently we've launched our KYX platform, where we are now looking at KYC and identity a little bit more holistically and bringing on other services onto the platform as well, like a biometric authentication, for example, like address validation, phone number verification, and other things.
Thank you, Philipp. So I'm going back to the question I was just asking about digital identity. I think Surash had a few things he wanted to say on this subject.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I think it was covered well. I think the only thing I'd really add is we've gone from this this world of identity, personal identity, which was, let's say, a name, address, date of birth, things like that. And then when we started with digital identity, it was almost just like a slight extension to that. And in lots of instances, it was the same information, but just held in a digital fashion. And you know, with the growth of all online services, we now have so many attributes about us, and you know, digital identity is a series of attributes that would ultimately identify us as individuals. The problem also is that those set of attributes can be about not an individual, and I guess this is where the idea of fraud comes in, because lots of people can register now without some kind of physical device like a mobile phone, and use email addresses to set up an identity on a social networking site or on some other digital or e-commerce platform and transact as an individual, and you know, without linking that to any formal you know, identity from the real world. And I think that's why mobile is playing such a key part in this, because it acts as that bridge between the virtual world and the real world, with that thing that you can hold in your hand, the phone or the SIM card. And I think as we go into this conversation, that will be the interesting part for me, is being able to differentiate between, real people versus a digital identity that might not actually relate to anyone.
Yeah, we certainly do want to draw out the importance of mobile in this whole debate. Does anyone else want to come in on this point?
Andrew, I'll just make one comment because I've got some survey data returned here from an iProov survey, just asking UK citizens what they actually think digital identity means. It was quite interesting. We had a range of responses. It's my NI number, my email, my digital signature, and account. And I think that's probably an illustration of that the public doesn't quite yet understand what digital identity is or could be. We thought that was quite interesting. And when we asked people if they think it'd be easier to have one digital identity, about 53% actually said they were using one. 10% said they never would, and about 17 and a bit % said I already have one that's going on. And I think for us, agreeing with what other people have said already, we understand a digital identity is a collection of validated attributes, but some of the points have already been made about actually connecting those attributes to the individual in some kind of process. So I thought those that bit of survey feedback might be interesting about what the public recognises and understands digital identity to be so far.
I mean, it's certainly interesting. We've just had a session on looking at national identity schemes in other markets, and the cultural aspect is very important with all of this, and people's different legacy positions in approaching identity and digital identity, and we've got some interesting messages coming out there.
So Andrew, I think there's one other thing it's just worth saying. I think it's worth calling out that digital identity in and of itself is actually very important too, and you don't always need to link it to a real world identity, but you do need trust in that digital identity. So there are many things that we do today online where we don't need to know that it's Paul or Andrew or anyone else, but we need to have an identifier that allows us to do business online, but also be trusted. And so it isn't just that identity is always linked to a passport or a driving license or some other form of real world identity. Having trust in a digital identity is also very important.
Thank you. Philipp, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much see it in the same way, and I think the big transformation really is gonna come by just more usefulness and more use cases. Today, we're thinking about digital identity replacing the use cases that are already there, where there is some format of providing identity today, either by uploading a picture of a document or using even kind of login credentials or whatnot. I think if we have a truly digital reusable identity that can hold a large variety of attributes and kind of reduce the privacy risks, we're going to see identity play a role in many, many more use cases than we expect today. I think even if you go online and you join a question and answer forum, for example. Today, you don't need to prove your identity. In the future, you might, because it's there, it's available, it's ready to use. And so I think we're going to see a rise in applications for identity use cases because it's going to be everywhere and at everybody's fingertips.
Thank you. I will come back to use cases in a little while. So before I move on to the next area, see if Stuart wants to come in there and give his thoughts on the issue.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I mean, again, we use the term identity in these types of forum like it's kind of one generic thing, when in fact it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And I think to Paul's comment, depending on what the use case is, you might want to have a very different definition of what identity really means. And certainly for our business, it's kind of light identity. It's more actually, verifying good users rather than catching fraud. And so it has a very different purpose. I think what I find fascinating about this space is to go back to the comment Luke made about Mrs. Miggins in the high street. What does identity mean to them? Actually, it's also about trust. Who do the average individual in the street trust with their digital identity? Who are the players that actually are important here? And certainly, you know, the mobile operators play an incredibly important role. Firstly, because they're already trusted to run a globally interoperable technology network that you get off a plane anywhere in the world, you switch it on and it just works, and people trust it. And that can be used to bring to bear in the identity space as well. And so I think the ecosystem will evolve to being a bunch of identity providers, i.e. where is the source of the information to the truth, I guess, which is what we're sort of talking about. And then who are the trusted intermediaries and third parties in the middle who serve up that truth to ultimately the consumers of the products. So I think it's a fascinating space, but it's very, very broad, and it's very hard to talk about it in very generic terms.
No, it's a wide-ranging subject, and we're probably generalizing some of the themes that are coming out. But you've raised a very interesting issue, Stuart, there on who would you trust to provide your digital identity. I think Luke has got his view on that particular topic.
Yeah, sure. Again, you're just bringing a bit of feedback from surveys again into the picture. You know, we actually asked again a large number of UK citizens in this case exactly this question, you know, who would you trust? And more than 50, well, actually 57% said they would trust their bank, but about 25% said they'd trust the government, and unsurprisingly, only about 11% said they'd trust a sort of social network company, you know, given the history of privacy concerns that they've actually helped bring to the fore, really, you know, in many cases. But I think, you know, a point that was just made earlier was, you know, perhaps are you going to have one identity, and would you trust one type of organization to be your provider for every single scenario in your digital life? You know, for example, if you're accessing your health records, would you be comfortable, even subjectively, you know, using the same digital identity to access your insurance records? I suspect that it will take a while for the public to kind of get on board with understanding how much they can trust the services, the providers of those services, and what it means for them to have one or more options, you know, within that set. And that's still while we live in a world where, you know, the relying party will provide the authentication mechanism, you know, and we may be moving to one where, you know, your self authentication of your verifiable credentials perhaps changes that picture slightly. But I think the trust question is a big one, and looks like banks are leading the way in the public's mind in the UK.
Thank you, Luke. Any other comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Luke, did they involve the telecom operators in their answers when they ask in survey who people are trusting as the suppliers?
It's a good question. I think the assumption here was that that was an option that they could consider. I don't think it was sort of ruled out. I don't know I'll check if it was offered, but when it comes to the platforms or the device agnosticism, you know, the assumption here is that the people that may be offering opportunities to have a digital identity service right now looks like, you know, governments and banks and social networks and other similar organizations, you know, are at the forefront of that. Those are the top 3 responses, but the actual full survey is available. So it's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to move the discussion onto a slightly different area now. We are the Mobile Ecosystem Forum and very interested in all things mobile. So I'd like to ask the question of what's driving the need for mobile-centric digital identity and authentication. And I think we'll go to Viktorija first on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So I think that our phone numbers are really connected to most part of our lives, from private to, of course, social and financial, etc. And because of that diversity of data and a map of digital aspects and data that MNOs can directly store and, of course, change in real time when something is changed, that's why we see the mobile centric as something very important in this portfolio. On the other hand, I think that someone already mentioned that mobile operators are seen as a trusted organization because they need to follow really strict rules and regulations, and they are storing their data. They are taking care about the data privacy, their subscribers, etc. That's why we see the mobile, let's say, centric digital identity. It's important, but what is driving that at the end? We are all aware of a pandemic did and brings in its high speed rising of digitalization, and we are all using our mobile device. I think it's by statistics, it's more than 60% of us are using mobile devices for our life and work, meaning banking transaction, social network, our, let's say, day-to-day life. And the companies were forced to go into that digital aspect in just few years. Some of them were able to adapt, some of them not. They are still searching for a best solution. And we see mobile-centric as something that could bring benefits and to let's say, accelerate as well all the different transactions that could be done in future on internet, in order, of course, to prevent the fraudster, in order to secure better user experience, etc. So there are plenty of different use cases and attributes that mobile operator as such can offer to the market to improve today's work and future, that will bring with more and more use cases that will be, and the transaction that will be needed on the digital aspects.
Okay. Anybody like to add anything to?
Yeah. So go ahead, please.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. I was just going to add, in terms of what's driving the mobile in this space. If you're looking at some statistics about online usage, mobile now actually does make up globally more than 54% of internet pages. And if you think about that, that's obviously skewed by region. And whilst Europe might be 51% on desktop, certainly places like Asia and Africa are well into mobile. Well over 60% of internet pages coming from mobile phones. And if we think about that, that's also driving e-commerce traffic as well. I think, as you're saying there, 65% of e-commerce traffic actually comes from mobile these days. And whilst mobile doesn't necessarily convert on the big high value transactions as well as desktop, certainly the volume of transactions happening on mobile is increasing all the time. And with that, naturally, unfortunately, comes fraud as well. I think we've seen lots of instances of helping customers stop that kind of card not present fraud by using some of the capabilities offered by mobile phone operators as part of our metrics to help secure that identity for retailers as they carry out these transactions. But I think you can't underestimate the fact that as we move more and more into this online world, the SIM card is probably outliving other devices, right? If you think about how often we might change our laptop, we typically these days wouldn't change our mobile phone number as often as we change our laptop. So from that perspective, I think mobile is going to increasingly play an important part in our lives. And working with the infrastructure that we've talked about there with mobile phone operators and some of the trust they have through that ecosystem, it's inevitable that we're going to increasingly go down this route.
Thanks, Surash. Somebody else wanted to come in there?
Yeah, so this was me, Philipp. So I think if you would stop someone and say, prove your identity to me, people would automatically still reach for their wallet. And I think this is the main practical consideration here, is that digital identities try to replace the position that is currently held by a passport, a driver's license, an identity card. And so it needs to be something that you have on you. It needs to be something that can transcend kind of from the online into the physical world. So it's present, you have it with you. It has a presentation layer, so you need a display, you need the capability to store something. So there's the storage element. And so that's why I think the mobile phone is the logical place that is going to hold our identities in the future, because we have them with us. They work in the physical world with the presentation layer. They work in the digital world. They work in a scenario where you're working with a desktop computer and you can then use your phone to kind of cross over to that transaction. And so I think those are the more practical considerations on why I think the mobile inevitably is gonna play a gigantic role in the digital identity.
Thank you, Philipp. I think I'll put that
Sorry,
question
Andrew,
to Paul.
just had a quick comment to make. I mean, I think as well when we talk about digital and interactions and transacting, we go straight to a kind of fairly deep definition of what identity is. And it's kind of the equivalent of walking down the high street and carrying your passport and showing people your passport every time you go into a store or you want to speak to someone. You know, actually, in most cases, you don't actually need a deep version of your passport just to do a straightforward login or interaction with someone you've already met before. So there is a kind of light touch authentication piece, which just says, you know, deterministically, is this the person I'm expecting or not? So I don't need to put them through the whole kind of, you know, treatment at the door before I let them in. So I think there is also a kind of use case bias to this that says we don't necessarily always need a really deep kind of identity in order to authenticate our customer.
Thanks, Stuart. Paul, I can bring you in here and ask you why you see mobile as an effective solution for digital identity.
I think I'll build on what Stuart said. I completely agree. A couple of the other comments that came in. I think that the fact it's universal is something that's very powerful, and I think the fact that mobiles have SIM cards in them is also a very important piece of information. So you've got something which is cryptographically secure, and you've got something that's in almost every person's pocket, not the whole world, but many people have phones now. So if you step back for a second, what's one of the biggest security issues facing the world? Well, it's passwords. So every day almost there's a new hack or some sort of criminal activity that's bringing either companies down, or in some cases governments are threatened, or health services are threatened. And that's fundamentally because we've got this situation where the kind of digital identity that we're using online is email plus password, and often it's email plus password plus SMS two-factor. But fundamentally, that kind of password paradigm is broken, and passwords are the sort of death of the password has been forecast for probably 10 years. So I think Bill Gates 10 years ago gave a speech saying, passwords are going to end. The reason passwords are still there is because they're universal. They're not secure, but they're universal. And it's been hard to find something that is both more secure and universal. There are lots of more secure solutions than passwords, but there haven't really been any more secure solutions that are universally available. And I think now the SIM card changes all that. So there are 5 billion phones out there which have SIM cards in them, and you've got this ability essentially to shift from something that was a knowledge-based factor into something that is a possession factor. And if you then add a biometric, then you've got a whole new ballgame, which is, the phones support biometrics. You can have on-device or off-device biometrics. And so if you move from knowledge to possession plus biometric, I think you solve a lot of these core security problems that the world faces every day. Yeah,
very much so. I think we see kind of multiple layers in the trajectory of where things are heading, from like the simple identification you talked about, the email plus passwords, through to verification, through to authentication. I'd like to really, we're exploring why mobile's an effective solution and what benefits it's delivering. But I'm really interested, we've talked a little bit about use cases already, and I'm very interested to know the sort of practical use cases that are appearing at the moment. So I'm going to go to Viktorija first on this topic. What sort of use cases are you seeing, Viktorija?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to tell you as well what happened to me 2 days back. So I left my mobile phone in my country house and I forgot it there. So I'm living 2 days without mobile phones, which is my mobile phone, which is really destructive, because I'm used to pay my bills with my mobile phones. I'm going to the shops with my mobile phones and have everything there. So just having that in mind, that's really showing us that there are plenty of use cases that can be fulfilled with the digital identity in order to help me to feel more secure while doing all these transactions, of course, and help me, especially in emerging market, helping people to become digital transaction available. So they could go into that space seamlessly. And of course, someone could trust them as their end clients and user, etc., by having their ARPU or verified person on other side. But all the verticals are really searching for digital identity as a solution, from gaming, gambling, dating, ride sharing. And if we just look at the most, let's say, convenient one as the banking and fintech, which are really taking care of money at the end, and they really need some solution which will help them to secure that and us on the network while using mobile phones. As well, if we are looking at the fact that US mobile banking grew for 50% in the first half of 2020, and the worldwide online banking spike at 200%. So this is something that we are really doing online using our mobiles. And in order to feel secure and protect us from fraudster, bank and financial institutions are looking for different kind of solutions, and the use case for them can start from very easy MSSDN verified or seamless mobile verification, which will, let's say, authenticate us at the beginning on the onboarding process while using that mobile app, for example, or cryptocurrency or whatever. It can be done for any verticals as well. Then, of course, if you're going in the bit higher step is account takeover protection, which is taking care about security on the network, preventing fraud, of course, by proving and providing signals if something suspicious happened in the network. Like we already know, SIM swap detection, call forwarding, location proximity not matching, etc. So if you're doing transaction and banks or fintechs wants to check if there is something suspicious in the background, they can easily do that by asking MNOs about the attributes and the signals on the network. By asking and receiving the answers in yes, no, or percentage answers, they can decide to continue with the transaction, to stop it, or to do some extra check there. If you're going into a bit more complex scenarios as a KYC and trust scoring algorithms, which is improving identity, helping end user to prove their reliability for loans, for example. New users, when they're coming to the banks, they don't have history in the bank sector, but they have their mobile phones already for ages, mobile numbers. So we are, as we mentioned already several times, we are not changing that mobile numbers very occasionally. So MNO stores real-time attributes, they change it when needed, and they know our behavior, and that data set is giving us credibility. So banks can use MNO's data set in order to decide to go with you as a client, to give you a loan, not to give you a loan, if you will be able to pay back the money, etc. So these are the use cases, very high level, where we can benefit from the digital identity. But as well as ours as a person, if we are living in some countries which are not that highly advanced, and we are not having credit cards, not having any kind of identity which can prove that we are reliable for loans of the fintechs, or even for buying alcoholic drinks online, etc. So all of this data set can really help to fulfill the use cases that are needed in today's online, let's say, way of living. We have a great project in India together with the GSMA as a partner, and there we started with simple MSSDN verified products available from MNO's side. And then we start, of course, to sell it on the market and talk with the clients who would like to buy it, and what to do it, how to implement it in their environment, etc. But then they ask us start about other attributes as well, how we can help them to prevent the fraud, how we can get the more security for their subscribers and users which are subscribers of the MNOs by providing location proximity, by providing 10-year result, number recycle result. So all of this is needed very much on the market. In Indonesia, for example, we did a great surveys with the majority of them was e-commerce and fintech. And what they are looking there as a country, the KYC data in order to validate and trust end user. So I think there are plenty of use cases out there. We still even don't know each of them, but there are as well plenty of solutions from, I know the MNO side, but as well from other providers that can help and benefit from that need.
Thank you, Viktorija. I think both Luke and Paul want to come in next, so we'll go to Luke and give your perspective on the use cases.
Thanks, Andrew. I just jotted down a few things people have been saying. I mean, you know, sort of the mobile devices becoming ubiquitous. Somebody mentioned universal. You know, consumers still want that convenience and instant access, as Viktorija was saying. And then we know that the volume of mobile traffic is growing globally, and the pandemic has only driven that higher. I think McKinsey recently stated about 75% of people using digital channels for the first time intend to stick with it, you know, after we return to whatever the future holds as a concept of normal. But for a minute, you know, if we look at the prevalence of adoption of or countries that have mobile-centric attitudes towards accessing digital services, we have use cases and customers in countries like Singapore and South Africa where that's very true. You know, the mobile centricity of the activity for banking and e-commerce and a range of different services is very, very high. And of course, what we bring to this conversation is the piece about not what you have, but who you are, something you are, you know, the face, for example, being an obvious biometric, and wanting to link that to verifiable credentials. And someone else mentioned earlier, you know, not needing to give a deep identity proofing, you know, as in exchange for access to everything. You know, sometimes it's just about being able to verify you're the owner of and asserting those verifiable credentials. But I think in those markets where there's a high, they've really embraced the mobile-centric activity, we also see that there is a new set of challenges that goes with that. There's often a broad, I picked those two geographies because there's a broad range of often low-spec mobile devices in these markets. And, you know, these are diverse populations as well. So from a biometric verification perspective in the story of mobile-centric solutions, companies need to provide solutions that mitigate against bias like ethnicity and age, you know, within the concept of inclusivity of access to these services. And we need to support a broad range of very low spec devices in these markets. So I think alongside this concept of mobile centricity, there is and this idea of ubiquitousness and universal. There is still these challenges around accessibility or inclusivity and usability that come up, you know, as a result of the diverse populations and a diverse range of devices. Somewhat, we may need to be agnostic of platforms and devices in order to succeed in making good on the promises of digital identity, mobile centric or otherwise.
Thank you, Luke. Paul, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think in terms of specific use cases, we're seeing a lot of interest, and we're spending a lot of time on actual mobile app onboarding. So typically when you have a new app or you're trying to register for a new app, there's this whole process that we go through, which I liken to climbing over a 12-foot high fence with barbed wire on the top, which is you just want to use the app, but actually then you've got to type your email, which is a painful process, and then you've got to enter a password, and then you have to wait for the SMS, you have to type the PIN, just to use the app. So whether you're doing authentication using SMS one-time passwords or an email PIN, customers are telling us that they're seeing 20 to 30% drop-off of users at that point. So that's a big conversion impact, and that typically just drives straight into revenue. Whereas if you move to something where you're using mobile-based authentication, you're using the SIM card as the identity, or you're silently verifying the phone number, you can have a significant impact on reducing that sort of conversion. And that's actually a better experience. And the story I tell is the thing that I think so fantastic about Uber is actually not that you can just call a taxi at any time. It's that when you get to your destination, instead of just looking in your wallet, figuring out the change, have you got the right currency? Should I tip the driver? How much should I give them? You just get out, you say goodbye, and you walk away. Because you wanted a taxi experience, you wanted to get there. You didn't want to pay. And when you're using a mobile app, you don't actually want to go through authentication. No one wants to go through authentication. You just want to use the app. So I think one of the things that's so powerful about using mobile-based authentication is you can just change that experience for so many users. And they can get away from that horrible experience of climbing that 12-foot high fence with the barbed wire and just enjoy the app that they wanted to sign up for in the first place.
Thanks, Paul. Philipp, would you like to come in there and talk about your experience on this issue? Yeah, it's muted at the moment.
Apologies. Yeah, so right now, absolutely everything is coming online, and it's coming online at a much faster pace than anyone could have anticipated. We've seen, 3-year digitization projects being done in 3 months because otherwise businesses would just have gone out of business, right? And so this acceleration is massive, and it's in all industries. It's suddenly in places where we really didn't expect it. It's in retail, because every time you pack something and get it shipped that is somewhat age restricted, you have to figure out who's receiving that package. Healthcare, it's like everything, insurance, everything that was used to people coming to a branch is suddenly moving online at an immense pace. And we see this in the business. Just 2 weeks ago, we crossed the threshold of verifying 1 million people in a single day based on their government issued IDs. And so it's a really it's a volume driver for the entire industry, but it's also a game changer. And it's a game changer insofar as that previously online was a choice, and now some of these businesses and especially for some of the use cases, going back to Luke's point of inclusion, it's not just for the digital natives. It's not a choice. It is the only way to get a service or get access to a certain business. And so suddenly the bar for inclusion has risen up, and all the companies need to be ready for that and be ready to deal with that. And the other thing on use cases is we're seeing a lot of new regulations around protection of minors everywhere on many additional industries. And this is also a factor where I think this is going to drive the usefulness of a digital identity or any identity solution to easily and maybe even passively and in the background verify someone's age as seamless as possible to make sure that the minors are protected.
Thank you. Stuart, Surash, would you like to come in there?
Yes, thank you, Andy. I think in terms of use cases, lots of discussion we've had so far has explained some of the use cases that we're seeing as well, or everything from onboarding to account takeovers using operators' data. I think the one point I'd make to build on that is that the way that we are working with firms is kind of like a pre-verification. We've been sending tens of millions, billions of messages for many years. And through that insight, you start to build up what a good, reliable customer identity, digital identity might look like. And you're able to build up some indication of reputation, and brands are using this, as we've all heard, to do some kind of pre-screening before they even do credit checks using the mobile information. The one thing I would say is that as we think about new use cases, onboarding has been one, but now we're looking at more use cases at different aspects of a customer journey, perhaps verifying before transactions or perhaps some other kind of event that happens during that customer journey. We're starting to have to think of slightly different models, because when you look at things like machine learning, it's great at the first aspect of onboarding, but then when you think about, well, what happens during the customer lifecycle, then you have to start thinking about other models as well. And I think one of the key things that's going to be important as we carry on looking at digital identity and using that to help brands work out, who are good customers, what is a true identity versus a fake one. I think, we're going to have to stay using tools like machine learning to help us make sure that we stay ahead of fraudsters. We start to build slightly different models that have different focuses, and that will help us make sure that we start to contain some of the fraud that's happening. Because when you look at some of the numbers involved, they're quite staggering. And as more and more brands, go digital, that number can only get worse without the intervention of brands like the ones we have on this call.
Thanks, Surash. Last but not least, Stuart, if you've got anything to add, we've got about 2 minutes left. So
I'll run the clock down, shall I?
And I do have a couple of questions I'd really love to ask that have come in.
For touch.
So, I mean, look, I echo a lot of the comments. We're seeing a lot around registration and login predominantly. And I would suggest that it takes into account two aspects of the carrier capabilities. One is the carrier technology, and mostly on that we are looking at authentication, and the biggest use case there is kind of becoming a much better, more secure and slicker mousetrap to the old-fashioned OTP, which, as we've discussed, is vulnerable. And so to be able to reach people kind of digitally through an API, is a vast improvement on that service. And then secondly, it's the information that the carrier knows about a user. And if someone else has done all the heavy lifting to KYC a customer, then why do it again? So being able to serve up, information about the reliability of name and address, age that you've been given by a user, and also the important linkage back to the phone number, so you can square that circle. Those are the things that we're seeing quite a lot, and we're seeing them in 3 continents. So this is a global solution.
All right, thank you. A couple of quick fire questions. I can probably only take one very brief response. What happens to my digital identity if I change my device? Who would like to take that one?
I mean, I'll add something very quick so there's time for others to add. I mean, essentially, when you're changing device, it brings back the question of, sort of some rebinding that to the person. So at what stage have you proven that you're the owner of that device? If that's part of your assertion of identity, that rebinding needs to occur. We very briefly, we mentioned earlier, we have a lot of experience in government use cases, and Philipp touched on the fact that those governments have to include everybody, and inclusivity is a major factor. But in many cases, people are onboarding to get access to credentials, which will give them access to many, many services, all of them reasonably high risk. Losing your phone down the toilet or changing device once every 18 months is a real world scenario, and be able to re-enroll essentially or rebind to a device is a practical issue. And not leaving a device out there as the definition of your identity without linking it back to something you are is very key.
Yeah, and I would kind of offer a slightly different view. The data needs to live somewhere. It needs to be somewhere, right? And I think there are these two schools of thoughts right now, where one is saying it's stored on the device itself, so it's on your mobile phone, it lives on your phone. If you take the phone and smash it on the table, it's gone. And maybe there is some proof somewhere that, so you have used your identity in different places and whatnot, but the source of the information is gone. That's kind of the purest self-sovereign identity idea. And then obviously, that is not practical, because then you run into these situations where, well, how do you recover? And then you have to go through all the checks again, or upload all your documents again, and kind of go through the assurance attestation again. That makes it very, very difficult. And so there may be a solution where someone else is storing this information, maybe in an encrypted fashion on your behalf, and then your face is the key to unlock it or something like that. So I don't think the ultimate answer has been found yet, and there's consensus in the industry. You have these different kind of schools of thought out there, and both have good points, I think. And I think it's going to be some kind of a trade-off solution in the future.
Thank you, Philipp. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I certainly had a lot more questions planned today for the panel, but we know we've explored some interesting areas. So I'd like to thank Stuart, Luke, Surash, Viktorija, Paul, and Philipp for their participation today. And I'll say goodbye and have a good day.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you for having
Thanks for having us.
Bye.